Monday, April 17th, 2017, Monaco 64, home of alternative economics and contrarian views. I like to talk about financial slavery, and what do I mean by that? Well, I mean the fiat money system under which the world is engulfed right now for the last 46 years or so. Since 1971 we've had a system based on debt, money printing, not based on reality, and a system that has favored the bankers, the central banks, the welfare state, which means politicians and governments. And that's why we got the problems we have in the West right now. The burden of government is getting bigger and bigger. The debt levels are huge. And yeah, people are not as independent. They're enslaved. And financially, there's an old saying, I'm not sure who made it, who said that gold is the money of kings. Silver is the money of gentlemen, and paper is the money of slaves. And it's one of the reasons I'm talking about this is because I watched over the weekend a little bit of documentary on Netflix about the U.S. Civil War, or the War of Secession, whatever you want to call it. And even though it took Lincoln until late 1862 to come up with the Emancipation Proclamation for the slaves, which took effect on January 1st, 1863, even though it took a while, the North and the South were really fighting for states' rights. And, that was the South fighting for states' rights, the right to self-determine, their status. And the North, the Union, was fighting to keep the Union together. But the underlying problem really was slavery. Because as the U.S. was expanding back then towards the West, the question of slavery was really important. Were the new states going to be allowed to have slaves? Were they going to be free states or slave states? And the South was concerned that they're going to lose their influence. The North didn't want the Western states to be slave states. So it erupted, with South Carolina, I think, was the first state to secede. They seceded in late 1860, before Lincoln was even inaugurated. And it's weird because President Jefferson Davis, president of the Confederate States, he actually was inaugurated before Lincoln was inaugurated, something I hadn't realized. But looking back at that period, it was a horrible war, of course. But nowadays, when we look at it, and it seems like so anachronistic to keep people in bondage and people, as property, working for you for nothing, just feeding them like animals. And yeah, it seems really something that really doesn't fit in with civilized society. And I think, there were people, of course, back then, the abolitionists, John Brown, who were against slavery. And the South, of course, no, they thought it was their right. They couldn't see their way of life different than what it was, with the big plantations and the slaves to work on them. And the North, of course, was more industrious and didn't need slaves. And I think we're at the same juncture nowadays. We don't have, of course, human slavery, but we have financial slavery, in my opinion, with the debt-based money system, or the fiat money system, where a group of people, very small group of people, the bankers, the central banks, and the governments as well, because it's the governments and the Congress and the parliaments that give the central banks and the banks the power, the monopoly power to print the money, which they use to perpetuate also the welfare state. So it's like the bankers scratch the back of the politicians and vice versa. Those who think it's only the bankers who benefit, I think are wrong. It's the bankers and the politicians, the welfare state. And that's why Alan Greenspan said it in his essay in 1966, Gold and Economic Freedom. He said that a system, a fair, sound money system based on gold and silver is the enemy of the welfare state. So I guess nowadays, people like me and people who, you want to call them gold bugs or sound money people, they are the abolitionists of, yesteryear. And I'm not sure what's going to happen, how the system's going to change, how things are going to be fairer. You can't have a group of people, creating something out of thin air and enslaving another group of people. All the taxes that are needed to keep this fiat money system going as well, because the only way to create money is through government debt. And unless, the governments can tax people to make that debt worth something, because the tax is basically, taking people's work, labor, ideas, services to make sure that this debt is worth something. It's nothing really different than a plantation. We are in a plantation. And the other thing that's also people need to think about, yes, it will be, in my opinion, a better world, but the transition will be difficult, because I'm sure a lot of the slaves back in the 1860s, when they were emancipated, they had a difficult time because they'd been looked after, so to speak, by the plantation owners. They didn't know how to be free. So it's the same thing that could happen. A lot of people don't know how to live self-sufficient lives independent of the welfare state. And that's what I think will have to happen, because the system's not sustainable. It's immoral, like slavery. And I think, 50 to 100 years from now, people are going to look back and say, how could they have had, this fiat money system, parasitical, debt-based system run by a few people, in charge of the banks and government. It's going to be like we look back at slavery today, in the South and also in other countries, and say, how could they do that? So, yeah, that's what I wanted to talk about. Market's fairly quiet so far. Most of Europe is closed today. I think all of it, really. The US and Canada are open. The markets have been trading. Foreign exchange markets stay open all around. And, we're just open here. The Dow's up 50 points. And gold got up to 1296 roughly overnight. Earlier, late yesterday, New York, early morning in London. And now it's come back down a little bit. We're at 1288. So basically unchanged from Friday. Silver got to 1867. The geopolitical situation, really nothing really happening, just a lot of talking and saber rattling. So yeah, that's it. Let's hope the financial slavery that we live under will be lifted somehow, and that people. And I think people are going to look back and say, how could they have lived under that system for so long? Almost 50 years now since the fall of the Bretton Woods. But even domestically, the U.S. hasn't had a gold standard since 1933. Europe since World War I, 1914. So we've been, really enslaved for over 100 years in Europe, and almost about 80 odd years in the US. So yeah, if you enjoyed this video, give me a thumbs up, share it far and wide. If you haven't subscribed to my channel yet, please do. If you'd like to make a donation to the channel, there's some links below in the description. I'll talk to you later. Take care.